The moment lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds of live television that will be studied in diplomatic circles for years. Mark Carney, standing at a podium in front of cameras from every major network, looked directly into the lens and said 4 words that no Canadian Prime Minister has ever said out loud to an American president in real time. He said, "America is not enough. Not behind closed doors, not in a leaked memo, not whispered to a European ally over dinner in Brussels. Live on camera in front of the world." Donald Trump was watching, and for the first time in this entire trade war, it was Washington that went quiet. To understand what happened on that broadcast and why it matters more than anything else you will read this week, you have to go back exactly 72 hours before Carney walked up to that podium. Because what looked like a spontaneous moment of defiance was not spontaneous at all. It was the final move in a sequence that had been building for months, and once you see the full sequence, you will never look at Canadian politics the same way again. Mark Carney has been Prime Minister for a relatively short time, but in that time, he has done something that veteran Ottawa watchers describe as almost unprecedented. He has run 2 governments simultaneously. The first government is the one Canadians see on the evening news. It announces grocery rebates, it visits hospitals, it talks about artificial intelligence and sovereign technology and jobs for young Canadians. It is reassuring and competent and deliberately unexciting. The second government runs underneath that one. It is the one that quietly signed a technology alliance with Germany in February. The one that sent trade ministers to Brussels before Carney had taken a single phone call with Donald Trump. The one that has been methodically, carefully, and with great patience, removing every single point of leverage that Washington thought it had over Ottawa. On the day of the broadcast, both governments moved at the same time, and the result was 11 seconds that changed the conversation entirely. Here is what the cameras actually captured. Carney was appearing in a joint press availability that had been billed as a routine economic update. The format was standard. Canadian journalists on one side, a pool camera feeding to networks, a podium with the Canadian flag. Nothing about the setup suggested anything unusual was about to happen. A reporter from a major American outlet asked a question that had clearly been designed to put Carney in a corner. The question was essentially this: given everything that has happened with tariffs and trade and the ongoing renegotiation of the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement, does Canada ultimately still need the United States more than the United States needs Canada? It was the trap question, the kind of question that has swallowed Canadian prime ministers whole for decades. The correct political answer, the safe answer, the answer every Canadian leader from Trudeau to Harper to Chrétien would have given, is some version of yes, we are partners. We value the relationship. We are working together constructively. Carney did not give that answer. He paused, not a nervous pause, a deliberate one. The kind of pause a person takes when they have already decided exactly what they are going to say, and they want to make sure the room is listening before they say it. And then he said it. He said that the old model of deep integration, the model that had defined the Canada-America relationship for more than half a century, was no longer the model Canada was building toward. He said that Canada was not turning its back on the United States. But he said that America is not enough, that Canada needs a future that does not depend on the choices made in one capital by one administration. And then he said the line that cut through everything. He said, "America is not our future is our own." The room did not erupt. It went still. And in that stillness, 11 seconds passed before the next question came. 11 seconds of live television silence that every editor in every newsroom in North America immediately understood was the clip. That was the moment. That was the headline. And it had not happened by accident. To understand why Carney chose that moment and that specific framing, you have to understand the document sitting underneath the press conference. 3 days earlier, his government had released what it was calling the Canada Sovereignty Economic Framework. It was not a flashy document. It did not have a slick name or a memorable acronym. It was dense and technical, and most journalists skipped to the summary. But the details buried inside that document are extraordinary. The framework outlines a 5-year plan to reduce Canadian economic exposure to the United States across 4 specific sectors: energy exports, critical minerals, agricultural trade, and digital infrastructure. In each of those 4 sectors, the document sets measurable targets. By 2028, Canada aims to have redirected a minimum of 18% of its current American-bound energy exports toward European and Asian markets. By 2027, Canadian critical minerals, the lithium, the cobalt, the nickel, that the entire electric vehicle revolution depends on, are to be governed under new long-term supply agreements with the European Union and with Japan. Agreements that explicitly exclude American intermediaries. By 2029, Canadian agricultural exporters are to have established direct market access in at least 7 new countries, reducing the share of food exports that travel south of the border below 40% for the first time in recorded Canadian trade history. And on digital infrastructure, the timeline is the most aggressive of all. By the end of 2026, Canada aims to have sovereign artificial intelligence compute capacity that does not route a single byte of sensitive government data through American-owned cloud servers. Read those numbers. Sit with them for a moment. Because what they describe is not a trade dispute. What they describe is a country that is quietly, systematically, and with enormous bureaucratic seriousness, engineering its own exit from an economic arrangement that most of the world assumed was permanent. And while Carney was saying those words on live television, while the clip was being cut and shared and quoted, something else was happening simultaneously back in Ottawa that almost nobody noticed. The same morning of the broadcast, the Liberal government used its majority in the House of Commons to advance 2 pieces of legislation that had been sitting in procedural limbo for weeks. The first was a fast-tracked investment screening amendment that gives the federal government new powers to block foreign acquisitions of Canadian artificial intelligence companies on national security grounds. The language of the amendment is written broadly enough that it could apply to American buyers just as easily as Chinese ones. The second was a regulatory change to Canada's telecommunications framework that mandates what officials are calling network sovereignty standards, essentially requiring that critical Canadian communications infrastructure be owned, operated, and physically located within Canadian borders by 2027. Both pieces of legislation passed their procedural hurdles in the same 3-hour window that Carney was standing at that podium, delivering the line that was already trending on every platform. It was not a coincidence. It was a choreography. The press conference was the magician's hand waving in the air. The legislation was what the other hand was doing while nobody was watching. Washington noticed, but Washington noticed too late. By the time the American ambassador's office in Ottawa had assembled a formal response and sent it up the chain, the clip had already been viewed 11 million times. By the time any American official appeared on camera to push back, Carney had already left Ottawa on a flight to Berlin for a previously scheduled meeting with Chancellor Friedrich Merz. The timing of that flight was not accidental either. The image of the Canadian Prime Minister wheels up to Germany within hours of saying America is not our future was not a coincidence. It was the punctuation mark. But here is what nobody in the press gallery has fully connected yet. The Berlin meeting was not a courtesy call. It was not a photo opportunity. According to sources inside the Canadian government's trade apparatus, Carney was traveling to Berlin to finalize the second phase of the Sovereign Technology Alliance, the phase that goes far beyond the General Cooperation Framework signed in February. Phase 2, if the reports are accurate, involves something that would represent a genuine structural shift in how the Western world's technology supply chain is organized. And if what Canada and Germany are about to announce is what insiders say it is, Donald Trump is not going to be angry. He is going to be alarmed. So what exactly is sitting inside that Berlin agreement that has Washington so unsettled? And why did Carney choose this specific week, this specific broadcast, this specific 11-second pause to make his move? The answer involves a technology that America thought it controlled completely, and Canada just found a way around it. Let's start with what America actually controls. Because to understand what Carney and Merz were finalizing behind closed doors in Berlin, you have to understand the single most important choke point in the entire global artificial intelligence race. It is not the algorithms, it is not the data, it is not even the talent, it is the chips. Specifically, it is the advanced semiconductor chips that make large-scale artificial intelligence computing physically possible. Right now, in 2026, one American company designs the overwhelming majority of those chips. The manufacturing of those chips is concentrated in Taiwan. The export of those chips to any country outside the United States is governed by American export control regulations that Washington can tighten, loosen, or weaponize at will. When Donald Trump talks about artificial intelligence dominance, what he is really talking about is chip dominance. Control the chips, and you control who gets to build artificial intelligence at scale. Control who builds artificial intelligence at scale, and you control the economic and military future of the next 50 years. Trump understands this. His executive orders on artificial intelligence from earlier this year make it explicit. American chips for American allies, on American terms, with American oversight. That is the deal Washington is offering the world. And until very recently, Canada had no choice but to take it. What Carney walked into Berlin to finalize changes that calculation in a way that is going to rewrite the technology map of the Western world. Here is what the sources are describing. Germany's industrial base, the most sophisticated precision manufacturing ecosystem on the planet, has been quietly working for the past 3 years on next-generation chip fabrication processes that do not depend on the specific design architecture that American export controls are built around. It is not that Germany has invented a better chip. It is that Germany, in partnership with Dutch semiconductor equipment makers and with significant investment from the European Union's CHIPS Act, has developed a parallel pathway, a way of building artificial intelligence compute infrastructure that is powerful enough for sovereign government and industrial use without touching the American-controlled supply chain at critical points. Canada's role in this parallel pathway is not to build the chips. Canada's role is to supply the raw materials that make the chips possible in the first place. The cobalt, the lithium, the nickel, the rare earth elements that sit in Canadian soil in quantities that make Canada one of the most strategically valuable pieces of real estate on the planet right now. Canada has the minerals, Germany has the manufacturing, the European Union has the regulatory framework and the market, and together, the three of them are building a technology supply chain that does not require Washington's permission at any step of the process. When Carney said on live television that America is not our future, he was not making a rhetorical point. He was describing an infrastructure that was already half built. He was telling the world that Canada had already found the door and was already walking through it. And the reason he could say it on live television without flinching is because by the time he said it, turning back would have cost more than going forward. The commitments were already made. The mineral supply agreements were already signed. The German manufacturing partnerships were already in motion. The European Union trade expansion was already producing real numbers. Carney was not threatening to leave the American orbit. He was announcing that he had already left. He was just doing it politely, in full sentences, on camera, in a way that gave Washington exactly enough time to understand what had happened, but not quite enough time to stop it. Now let us talk about Donald Trump's response, because the response itself tells you everything about how seriously Washington is taking this. Trump did not tweet. He did not post. He did not call a press conference. He did not dispatch a cabinet secretary to the cameras to deliver a sharp rebuttal. What he did was pick up the phone and call 3 people in rapid succession within 6 hours of the clip going viral. He called the CIO of the largest American artificial intelligence infrastructure company. He called the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he called the American ambassador to the European Union. We know this because it leaked.